There is a moment right before things are supposed to change, and most people miss it. Not because they are unaware, but because it looks like nothing is happening. You've been waiting, you've been consistent, you've been doing everything you know to do, but the results still haven't shown up. Opportunities feel close, but never fully open. Progress starts, but doesn't complete. Things almost move, but then stop again. And after a while, you start thinking, why does it feel like I'm always right at the edge, but never stepping into the next season? I've seen this pattern before, not from the outside, but from a place where delay was not random, where it followed specific points. Because when I was on the other side, we didn't focus on stopping someone completely. We focused on slowing them down at key moments, right before progress, right before opportunity, right before transition. Because if you can delay someone long enough at those points, they begin to lose momentum. And once momentum is lost, everything feels harder. Now, this is important because delay is not always obvious. It doesn't always look like a complete stop. Sometimes it looks like small interruptions, distractions that pull your focus, hesitation when you need to act, overthinking when you should move forward. And because these things feel normal, you don't recognize them as part of a pattern. Now understand this clearly. Delay doesn't always block you, it slows you down just enough to keep you where you are. So today, I'm going to show you 3 ways to break that pattern. Not after the delay has already taken over, but before your next season begins. Because once you catch it early, you don't just move forward, you move forward without the same resistance. And that is what changes everything. Now, this is the first place delay shows up, and it's the most subtle: hesitation, not fear that stops you completely, but a small pause right when you should move. When I was on the other side, this was one of the easiest ways to slow someone down because hesitation doesn't feel dangerous, it feels reasonable. You tell yourself, let me think about it a little more. Maybe I should wait. I'll do it later. And in that moment, you don't realize what just happened. You lost momentum. Now, here's the key: momentum is what carries you into your next season, and hesitation breaks it. Not all at once, but just enough. Now, think about this. An opportunity appears, an idea comes to you. You feel the urge to take a step forward, but instead of acting, you pause, you overthink, you delay the decision, and by the time you come back to it, the energy is gone, the clarity is weaker, the moment has passed. Now, this is how delay works. It doesn't stop the opportunity, it disconnects you from it. Now, here's the shift: you don't remove hesitation completely, you respond to it immediately. The moment you feel that pause, you recognize it, you don't let it grow. You don't let it turn into overthinking. You act, even if it's a small step, because action keeps momentum alive. Now, this is important. You're not rushing blindly. You're choosing not to stay stuck in unnecessary delay, because most hesitation is not about needing more time, it's about losing confidence in the moment. Now, here's a simple way to break it. When you feel that pause, you tell yourself, I will not delay what I already know to do. And then you move immediately. Now, when you do this consistently, something changes. You stop missing small opportunities. You stop overthinking simple decisions. You begin to trust your initial clarity again. Not perfectly, but more often. And that's enough to build momentum. Now, this is the first break in delay, at the moment of action, where most people pause. Now, in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the second way, because even if you act quickly, there is another place where delay quietly returns. And if you don't catch it, it slows you down again without you realizing it. Now, this is the second place delay hides. And this one is even more dangerous because it doesn't feel like delay at all. It feels like normal life. Distraction. When I was on the other side, this was one of the most effective ways to slow someone down without them realizing it. Because instead, now this is the final place delay takes control. And this is where most people lose everything they started. Overthinking. Not simple thinking, not careful decision making, but thinking that goes in circles without movement. Now, this is where everything connects because hesitation, distraction, and overthinking are not separate problems. They are parts of the same pattern. When I was on the other side, this was the real strategy. Not to stop someone once, but to keep them moving in a loop. Because if you can keep someone inside a pattern, they will stay in the same place even while trying to move forward. Now look at how this works. You get an idea or opportunity, but you hesitate, you delay the first step. Then instead of acting, you get distracted. Your focus shifts to something else. Time passes. Now, when you finally come back, you start overthinking. You question everything. You lose clarity. You delay again. And just like that, the cycle completes. Now, understand this clearly. Delay is not one moment, it is a repeated sequence. Hesitation, distraction, overthinking, again and again. Now, this is why it feels like nothing changes. Because even when you try to move forward, you get pulled back into the same sequence. Now, here's the key. You don't break delay by fixing one part. You break it by interrupting the pattern wherever it appears. At the beginning, when hesitation shows up, in the middle, when distraction tries to take over, at the end, when overthinking slows you down, because every interruption weakens the cycle. Now, this is important. You don't need to be perfect at all three, you just need to become aware of them. Because awareness gives you a choice. Now, instead of reacting automatically, you respond intentionally. You act instead of hesitating. You refocus instead of drifting. You decide instead of overthinking. And those small shifts start changing everything. Now, this is the real breakthrough. Not one big moment, but consistent interruption of the same pattern. Now, in the next chapter, I'm going to show you how to lock this in because once you understand the pattern, you need to make sure it doesn't rebuild itself again. And that's where most people lose it. Now, this is where most people lose everything they just understood. Not because they didn't get it, but because they didn't turn it into something consistent. When I was on the other side, this was the final point we depended on. People would recognize the pattern. They would see hesitation. They would notice distraction. They would even catch themselves overthinking, but they wouldn't maintain the response. They would correct it once and then go back. Now understand this clearly. Awareness without consistency changes nothing. Because if you only interrupt the pattern occasionally, it will rebuild itself quietly. Now here's the shift. You don't treat this like something you try once. You treat it like a system you apply every time the pattern appears. Every hesitation, you act. Every distraction, you refocus. Every overthinking loop, you decide and move. Not perfectly, but immediately. Now, this is important. Speed matters. Not rushing blindly, but responding quickly before the pattern grows. Because delay becomes stronger the longer you sit in it. Now, here's what happens when you apply this consistently. Your reaction time changes. You don't stay stuck as long. You don't drift as far. You don't overthink as deeply because you interrupt it early. Now, this creates something powerful: momentum. And momentum is what carries you forward into your next season. Not effort alone, not intention alone, but consistent forward movement. Now, here's the key: you don't wait to feel ready. You act while you're still uncertain. You don't wait for perfect clarity. You move with the clarity you already have, because action creates more clarity. Now, when this becomes your pattern, something shifts. You stop feeling stuck. You stop delaying simple decisions. You start moving forward more naturally, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer feeding the delay. Now, in the final chapter, I'm going to show you the last step, because once you start building momentum, you need to protect it. And if you don't, the old pattern will try to pull you back again. Now, this is the final step, because once you start breaking delay, something else happens. You begin to build momentum. Decisions become faster. Actions become easier. You stop overthinking every step. And for the first time, you feel movement. But this is also the most vulnerable moment. When I was on the other side, this is where we focus the most. Not at the beginning, but right after someone started moving forward. Because momentum attracts resistance. Small things, subtle things. You start feeling tired. You lose urgency. You think, I can't slow down now. And that's how the pattern tries to return. Now understand this clearly. The moment you slow down too much, the old pattern starts rebuilding. Not instantly, but gradually. You hesitate again. You allow small distractions. You overthink one decision. And suddenly you're back in the same cycle. Now here's the shift. You protect your momentum the same way you built it, with consistent action. You don't go back to waiting. You don't go back to delaying simple things. You keep moving, even in small steps. Now, this is important. You don't need to move fast. You just need to not stop. Because stopping completely is what resets everything. Now, here's what this looks like. You continue acting on what you know. You continue making decisions without unnecessary delay. You continue correcting yourself quickly when you drift. Not perfectly, but consistently. Now, when you do this, something changes. Momentum becomes natural, action becomes easier. Delay loses its control over you because you are no longer giving it space to grow. Now, this is the final truth. You don't break delay once, you break it, and then you refuse to return to it again and again until your new pattern becomes stronger than the old one. So don't slow down now. Don't go back to hesitation. Don't allow distraction to take over again. Keep moving. Stay consistent. Because once momentum becomes your default, you won't just enter your next season, you'll move through it without the same resistance. And that is where real change begins. Now everything comes down to this moment. Not what you heard, not what made sense, but what you decide to do next. Because understanding delay does not break it. Recognizing the pattern does not stop it. Only action, consistent action, changes anything. When I was on the other side, this was always the final point. People would hear truth. They would feel motivated. They would see where they were stuck. And then they would wait. They would say, I'll start tomorrow. I'll apply this later. I just need a little more time. And in that waiting, they stepped right back into delay. Now understand this clearly. Delay doesn't end when you understand it. It ends when you refuse to participate in it. That's the difference. Now here's your moment. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now, because the next decision you make will either follow your old pattern or break it. Now, this is what stepping into your next season looks like. You act when you feel hesitation. You refocus when distraction appears. You decide when overthinking starts. Immediately, not perfectly, but intentionally. Now, this is important. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need complete clarity. You already have enough to move. And movement is what creates the next level of clarity. Now, here's what will happen if you act. You will feel resistance at first. You will catch yourself slipping sometimes. You will have moments where it feels easier to go back. But if you continue, something shifts. Your confidence builds. Your decisions become stronger. Your actions become more natural. And before you realize it, you are no longer stuck in the same place. Now, here's what happens if you don't. Nothing changes. The same delays repeat. The same patterns continue. The same frustration remains. And over time, you stop expecting anything different. Now, the choice is clear. You either continue the cycle or you break it now. So don't overthink this. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't delay your next step. Take action right now. Because the moment you move, you are no longer controlled by delay. You are stepping out of it. And that is where your next season truly begins. Now, this is the part most people won't accept. But it's the truth. Even after everything you've heard, most people will not change. Not because they can't, but because they won't stay consistent long enough. When I was on the other side, this was the one thing we depended on the most. Not ignorance, not weakness, but inconsistency. People would feel motivated for a moment. They would take action for a day, maybe two. They would interrupt delay once or twice. And then slowly, they would go back. Back to hesitation, back to distraction, back to overthinking. Not all at once, but gradually. Now understand this clearly. The pattern doesn't return suddenly. It rebuilds quietly. You hesitate on one decision, you ignore one distraction, you overthink one situation, and those small moments start stacking again until one day you realize you're in the same place. Now, this is why most people stay stuck. Not because they didn't learn something new, but because they didn't protect what they learned. Now, here's the warning, not to discourage you, but to prepare you, because this will happen. There will be days you don't feel like acting. There will be moments where delay feels easier. There will be times you want to go back to comfort. And in those moments, you have to decide again, not once, but repeatedly. Now, this is the difference. Those who stay stuck decide once and stop. Those who move forward decide every time the pattern tries to return. Now, here's the shift. You don't rely on motivation. You rely on commitment because motivation fades. But commitment keeps you moving even when it feels difficult. Now, when you understand this, you stop expecting it to be easy. You stop thinking one action will fix everything. You start showing up again and again. And that's what builds a new pattern. Now, this is the final truth. You are not fighting one moment of delay. You are replacing a pattern that has repeated for a long time. And that takes consistency. So don't let this become something you heard once and forgot. Don't allow the old pattern to rebuild quietly. Stay aware, stay active, stay committed. Because once your new pattern becomes stronger than the old one, delay no longer controls you the same way. And that is the difference most people never reach.